Payne Caldwell. I have been a professor at this university since 1991, with the exception of 6 years when I chaired the History and Geography Department at Georgia College and State University, which is the public liberal arts university of the state. And then I came back here in 2008 and have been here since, running the Center for Georgia History, and since our merger, also serving as the university historian. Prior to that, in the 1980s, I taught at Payne College for 11 years, which is an historically black college here in Augusta that was founded in the 1880s in the post-Civil War period by biracial Methodist churches, Southerners, which is interesting in itself because most of the African American colleges had been founded by Northerners, but these were black and white Methodists who came together to found Payne. When our school system started, it was started as a biracial school system, although schools were integrated from the very beginning. So there's an important story, I think, to tell there, all the way up through the Jim Crow era. The civil rights movement here and in the state of Georgia, very important, with Dr. King being centered in Georgia and coming to Augusta at a couple of points, but we had some leaders in our own community. And then what has happened post-civil rights and some of the issues that the African American community and the Board of Education are still dealing with as schools seem to at least in some areas, resegregate. And so I think those are important issues that we need to continue to try to address, and I don't think we can understand them if we don't understand the background to them, how we got to this point and what some of the problems are.
One thing to understand about Lucy Craft Laney was that she was a national figure of prominence. That's one thing that I often like to stress when people come to the museum or when people ask me about Miss Laney. Miss Laney was not this obscure educator living in Augusta with this backwater school that only catered to a certain clientele. At the height of its popularity, the Haynes Institute was a nationally recognized school with a very comprehensive education, very detailed outline and programming that Miss Laney crafted from the very beginning. She was a national figure of prominence. Not only did she rise to notoriety, but also many of the people that she mentored would also become prominent educators and prominent activists in their own right. Back to your initial question, what was her contribution to education? I think that the first thing to understand is that Miss Laney created what we today would call a comprehensive style approach to education. So many schools that have a comprehensive education where they offer various tracks from vocational to a more classical style, business, a little bit of everything. Miss Laney had this all the way back to the late 1800s, early 1900s. So in that case, she was a visionary, where she created a school that catered to the various needs of her community.
And I really enjoyed. I learned about Miss Laney, and I learned about her contributions and the importance of her contributions being carried into. And so I worked very diligently. Well, I continue to work very diligently along with the staff. When Miss Laney left college, Atlanta University, she went back to her home in Macon, Georgia, and she worked there for a short period of time. Then she went to Millersville. She worked there for a short period of time. Then she went to Savannah, Georgia. When she went to Savannah, Georgia, of course, she made a lot of contributions there. And she came to Augusta. And the Presbyterian ministry, some of the ministers, asked her to come to Georgia, or come to Augusta, and start a school for girls. She started her first school in a church on Telfair Street, Presbyterian Church, in the basement. She was supposed to teach girls only, but the first day of school, 4 girls came and 2 boys, so she kept it. It was co-ed from the beginning. And then she realized that she needed money because she moved from that space onto another building. And by 2 years, she had 200 children. So she knew that she had to go out of the city and seek funding for a new building. So she went to the Presbyterian Assembly in Minnesota. And when she got to the Presbyterian Assembly, she sat down on a bench and she waited for them to call her so she could present her request. And so she did. And everybody was impressed with what she said or what she wanted to do. However, they didn't offer her any money, but they did give her a train ticket back to Augusta. And it wasn't long before, 2 or 3 weeks before, a lady by the name of Miss Haynes called her. And she said, I'm so impressed with what you're doing. I'm going to give you the money to build a school for your children. And she gave her $10,000. And Haynes Normal and Industrial Institute was established on that block that you saw when you came in. And that school was in existence until 1949. And it was torn down. And they built a new school. And that's the Lucy Craft Laney Comprehensive High School.
Most of her students, once they graduated from Haynes, would go to certain schools. Atlanta University, which is today Clark Atlanta University in Atlanta, Georgia, Lincoln University in Eastern Pennsylvania, Howard University in Washington, D.C., and most of the students who ended up going to Howard would either go to the medical school or the law school. So Miss Laney firmly believed in preparing her students for higher education, and the bulk of them ended up going to those schools, and from there carving out their own legacy with respect to their own profession, whether they were doctors, lawyers, dentists. In the case of Frank Yerby, he became one of the most recognizable African-American authors of the 20th century, educated right at Miss Laney's school at Haynes and then later Payne College. And so that was, Frank Yerby I often use as an example of the type of product that Miss Laney produced, the type of student that came out of Haynes. One thing I often like to point out is Miss Laney creates the Haynes Institute. It's chartered in 1886. So here you have 21 years removed from the formal end of slavery in the United States. I think in the mind of Miss Laney, she wanted to create a school that would educate the sons and daughters of former slaves, since it was one generation removed. And even though Miss Laney was never a slave herself, she was born during slavery in 1854. So Miss Laney was born in an era in which African Americans were second-class citizens. She saw education as a vehicle to pull them out of the mental shackles of slavery, the physical shackles of slavery, and pull them out of this whole notion of being second-class citizens. Education was that doorway that they would create this balance within American society. And so I often say Miss Laney's purpose in creating the school and creating a climate of education, it was very purpose-driven. She had a purpose in mind, she had a calling in mind, and she used every resource at her disposal to create the schools and to create the climate for education.
2 years before the Haynes Institute was founded, Payne College opened its doors in January of 1884. The leadership of the Colored Methodist Episcopal Church and the Methodist Episcopal Church South sat down together to hear the idea of Bishop Lucius Henry Holsey about opening the college in 1869. Bishop Holsey wanted a group of people trained in education and the Bible who would be able to help the African American community that was recently freed from slavery. Bishop Holsey traveled throughout the Southeast raising funds for the school. On December 12, 1882, he gave the Payne Board of Trustees $16, all money from former slaves. Meanwhile, Bishop Atticus Haygood donated $2,000 to finance the school, and thus, Payne College started its long history of education in January of 1884 in Augusta, Georgia. Many educators who graduated from Payne College went on to work in education in the central Savannah River area. Educators like Dr. Judy Carter, Robert Jones, Betty Tutt, and Audrey Wood. However, it was their experiences growing up and learning in a segregated community that led them to be the passionate educators they turned out to be.
Well, I was born in a little town about 40 miles north of Augusta called McCormick, South Carolina. A very poverty-stricken area of South Carolina. I'm from a single-parent home. My mother had 3 children. I'm the youngest of 3. I never thought about going to college when I was growing up because we were poor, and that's something that was never discussed in our home. As a matter of fact, when I finished high school, my teachers, before I finished high school, my teachers told me I needed to go to college. And we got in a bit of an argument about that because to me they just didn't understand that we didn't have any money and I could not go to college. So one of my teachers insisted, she brought an application to school for me to go to Payne College, which is right down the road, right down the street. She had graduated from Payne College, and she said, Judy, you have the ability and you shouldn't sit around and just keep saying you're not going, because there are ways that you can go. Of course, I didn't know any of those ways she was talking about. So this teacher helped me to fill out the application to go to Payne, and so we filled it out and wrote the letter, and I was accepted. I couldn't believe I was doing that, and it was another world for me. Like I said, we never discussed college in my family. I couldn't believe I was there, and it didn't take me long to start really enjoying Payne College, and I met a lot of new people from different places. We had students there from all over the country and even from foreign places. So it was a culture shock kind of for me to meet people from all these different places.
Well, as was the case with many people from minority segments of the community, always my mother emphasized early on from an adolescent time that education was the key out of the state of existence that I was born into. And she literally pounded that into my head continuously. And it took on great significance for me because my mother only had a 7th grade elementary education. And yet, the most memorable thing about that discrepancy between the amount of education she had and my emphasis on my education was that she would make me read the newspaper to her laboriously every day so that she could understand it. Mm-hmm. And it just touched something in me and became a part of my projection going forward of who I wanted to be. And I guess she planted me to see that education was the window to something better. And it just drove me. And when I graduated from Lucy Craft Laney in class of '63, Augusta was segregated, and I was always hearing about the disparity between minorities, blacks in particular, and the educational disparities and discrepancy and opportunities. And once I graduated, I started to feel and see it as I transitioned out of high school into the next level. And that made me more determined to get a better education. And a white historian came to Laney, the senior class, and said to us, you know, as African Americans, there's a perception of you people that you are undereducated and you're not educatable to our level. And that struck me, it stayed with me, and made me determined to prove that I was educated and that I could achieve a level of equality in that sense. And it drove me. And I became a professional student, determined to go as far as I could, and at some point realized that, you know, oftentimes the name of prestigious places sometimes meant more than the reality of what you actually gained from it. And so every time there was a scholarship available to go somewhere academically to a prestigious, I applied in June based on my academic record here as a student. I got them. So I went off, and it expanded my horizons. Well, you know, from the era of segregation, for example, there are I had several what I would call revelations that set the tone for me for what that was, vis-a-vis who I am and what race I was as opposed to the larger community. And they were rather traumatic, some of them. One of the most vivid ones I had was I remember when I was 15 years old, and I wanted to take a bus from Augusta to Athens, Georgia. And I went down to the Greyhound bus station. And then, you know, a ticket from Augusta to Athens, Georgia, was only about $5. Cheap. And I gave the guy at the bus station a $10 bill, the white clerk behind at the cage. And he gave me the ticket. And I said, sir, where's my change? And he said, change? You don't give any change. And I said, I gave you $10, sir, and the ticket's only $5. And of course he blew up and said, you calling me a liar, blah, 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 nigger, and so and so and so. And a white cop who was the guard at the bus station walked up and put his hand on his gun and said, boy, you best get out of here and stop challenging the word of a white man before I blow your black ass. And that was my first stark, in-your-face encounter with segregation and racism. And it left me dead mark on my mind. And then I realized, of course, the difference between who I was and who everybody else was in terms of the system. And it made me determined to find a way to achieve as much balance as I can between the realities of what segregation was and my existence vis-a-vis it. People like Martin Luther King, everybody preaching education, education. And so the significance of that came home to me then. Because, you know, I had no idea what I was going to do. And so that kind of embellished the.
Oh my, it was really bad. You had two separate things. Everything was separated. In all the schools, you had black schools and you had white schools. Black private schools, and you also had white private schools. You had a white this and the same thing, a black one over here.
Okay, yeah, I heard when I was in high school that we got the hand-me-down secondary books that the white kids no longer use at Richmond Academy and so forth, and that all of our learning material were always outdated or secondary, and that, we were supplied with all of the lesser things that nobody else knew. And so I had a few white friends because my mother was a maid in this nursing home up here on Walton Way, and the owner's son and I got along well, and he would tell me, he'd show me the books he had at Richmond Academy. No, we don't have that down at Laney. And he said, that's right. And I started realizing, okay, it's true, we do get lesser stuff. And so what I did was, okay, way around this now, in terms of what you asked me, how did I realize, try to raise my level to a higher level in terms of what I was aware that we were not being given the same exposure. I would go to the library, right down here, Wallace Branch Library, every day religiously after school, and read the New York Times, Newsweek. I did it every day. And it became such a routine for me that the librarian gave me a little cubicle in the back. And also in the summertime, instead of running the streets with my guy, I would go to the library all summer and read books off the shelf. Never checked them out and took them home because they'd never get back. They would get lost. And that's what I did. And it was through that incessant reading that I just raised the level of my awareness and my ability to learn. And it really helped me. And I just read aggressively New York Times, Chicago Tribune, Life magazine. And it helped open up a whole new horizon for me. And as I was, and one of the things I realized about my so-called lack of preparedness was, for example, vocabulary. And so when I would read these magazines and stuff, I'd come across all these words that were totally foreign to me. But heck, I keep a dictionary with me and look them at. It helped, it expanded my vocabulary. So it was kind of self-education. It was a great thing, and that's how I did it. And it really helped me catch up. And the reading, expanded my ability to compose sentences and everything. So, yeah, that's how I did it. Because I realized that I was less handicapped in that sense. Well, yeah, the library system was segregated. Wallace Branch was considered the black library in Augusta, right down here on Laney Walker. And I can't recall at any point in time going downtown to the public library during that period. And I can't say definitively it was quote unquote legally segregated, but I do remember there was always reluctance by blacks to go downtown to what we call the main library. You might say we were very much aware that we were not kind of wanted down there in that sense. But whether it was legally so, I can't say. It may not have been, but since everything else was, I kind of assume it was. Because I remember your black-white water fountains in the courthouse down there. And, my mother almost snatched my back out when I mistakenly went to the white fountain to drink some water, and she grabbed me. You can't drink out of the fountain. So stuff like that. So, if you were black, you knew the Wallace Branch Library. That was our library.
I want to tell you what happened my first year of teaching and my first month in this all-white school. This parent called me and she said, "Why are you in our school?" And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Why are you teaching in our school? You are a nigger, and I don't want any niggers teaching my child. And you need to go to a nigger school." So I said, "Mrs. Green," I'll never forget her name if I live to be 100. I said, "Mrs. Green, I am an African American. I'm not a nigger. I said, I don't know how you came up with that name. And I said, I was sent here by the Board of Education. I didn't ask to come here. I said, I was trained to teach all children, not just black children, but all children. And I will probably be one of the best teachers your son has ever had. She said, well, I don't want you here, and I wish you would change your mind and go to another school. I said, well, your wish is not going to come true because I'm not leaving. I had expected something like that to happen, and it did. And I'm so proud now to see how much things have changed. Just like last month, they had the program honoring black instructors here. And I almost cried when I went to that and I saw what was happening, because years and years ago, that never ever would have happened here or anywhere else. That would not have happened.
Education standards for the African American community has changed since its inception in the 1800s. Today, many educators are finding innovative ways to teach children of all races on a variety of subjects. But in the 1980s, teaching methods experienced a big change.
By the 1980s, the lead reading teacher had transformed into the lead teacher, period. And lead teachers, were responsible for actually implementing curriculum. I know it's the principal's job. That's the primary responsibility of a principal, is to implement curriculum, but the lead teacher was responsible for actually, providing a tremendous amount of guidance and in-service for the teachers. We were a help to the principals, and I liked it because, curriculum just seems to be my strong area.
Tested by the government's National Commission on Excellence in Education, and in 1983 their report comes out.
Got a bombshell in 1983. And it was called A Nation at Risk. That report was released by the U.S. Department of Education, and it had so many criticisms about the education system in the United States of America. They said we were mediocre, that our students, were not performing, they were underachievers.
Math skills are so poor that half the freshman college math classes are remedial.
Told the mayor that she was moving the end of the week.
Passing through the public school system no longer guarantees basic skills.
I don't know why they gave me a diploma, because I don't know nothing. I didn't know how to read, write, or speak very well.
At the national and international, on national and international scales, that the SAT scores had dropped, 40 points in the verbal area and in math from 1963 to 1980. Some other complaints or other information that they shared, facts that they shared, was that 17-year-olds could not draw inferences successfully in written material, that American students were never first or second on 19 academic tests compared to other industrialized nations, and they were last 7 times.
We're in high tech, and we teach the average kid in the United States 1 to 2 years of mathematics. Japan has 6 years of math. Russia has 7.5 years of math. They cover calculus, differential, and integral equations before they graduate. We've got to compete with these kids later on in a high-tech society. Our kids are not going to be adequately trained.
Excellence is going to cost. And I think the only way that can be understood is to appreciate that mediocrity is going to cost far more.
And honestly, you all, it really shook me up. And I felt personally responsible, like I had done this, And that's when I went back to school. I enrolled in the University of Georgia. I drove down to the University of Georgia on weekends for 2 years. 2 years. But, I just had to make myself feel better, and I had to learn more so that I could share more with the teachers that I was responsible for helping to become better teachers and for our test scores to improve, and et cetera, et cetera.
Known in the field of curriculum, and we worked on the models of teaching. And so that was a project that I implemented in the school where I was principal at Barton Chapel Elementary School. I found that to be a very strong teaching method, or a teaching focus for helping children to master the curriculum standards. It required lots of work. Some teachers liked it and some didn't, because it was something new and it was something different, and it required a different mode of thinking in terms of addressing curriculum and providing curriculum at the classroom level. It wasn't open the book and we'll read these pages today and then we'll talk about it. Models of teaching required teachers to do advanced preparation, and not only to use the textbook as a means of, I guess you would say, an advanced organizer to whatever the concepts were, but to use other familiar type experiences and other materials of interest to lay the groundwork for the concept that the teachers wanted to teach, and then to move on further into mastering those curriculum standards and then enhancing and extending the learning with those curriculum standards. Evidence was in the children's test scores. At that time, the state mandated test was the CRCT, the Georgia CRCT. And so the Barton Chapel School, if people were to describe it, they would describe it as located in a low-income area where children had little support at home, and so the job for learning was definitely the responsibility of the school. The evidence of that kind of focused instruction and conceptual-based instruction became very evident with our first grade test scores. You know, we had the minds of the children when the minds were very young, and the minds were just soaking up whatever the teachers were providing for them, and the thinking was being developed in the way that teachers were developing the critical thinking, conceptual-based curriculum studies. Didn't have to fight through or work through students already immersed in a learning culture of, all right, open the textbook and we're going to read page such and such and such, and we'll look at the highlight words, and then we'll underline this and we'll underline that, and then I'll ask you some questions. At the first grade level, their minds were brand new. And so the evidence of the success in that instruction was reflected in our CRCT test scores, where for my first grade students at Barton Chapel, their test scores ranked higher than the test scores in a very affluent school in the west side of Augusta, where children and families and communities didn't struggle with the issues and the barriers that the children we service, children and families we service in the Barton Chapel area struggled with. So,
I'm Michael Searles. Michael Nathaniel Searles is my full name. I taught at Augusta State University for 20 years full-time. My area of interest and history, my academic area is African American history, and I've taught United States history, African American history, and a course called Blacks in the American West. And so my specialized interest, my specialty really is the Black Cowboy and the Black West. Quite a few years ago, maybe as many as 30 years ago, I started doing research and discovered that there were Black cowboys. I always thought I'd been teaching Black history for a long time, but I didn't really know much about Black cowboys. And once I discovered there were Black cowboys, again, I began to do research, collect materials and artifacts and various items and affected a cowboy dress. I got my cowboy hat and bought some cowboy boots and working clothes, etc. And I began to do presentations. I gave presentations to elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, and then eventually universities on the Black West. And as I would go out to do these presentations, I would introduce myself as Cowboy Mike. In fact, there are a lot of people who only know me as Cowboy Mike. It's a name that a lot of people know me by, and that's just fine. A lot of people call me Cowboy Mike, and that's fine. There are a wide range of students who come through the university who are not history majors, and they're not majoring in the social sciences. They're science majors, they're physical education majors, etc. And they really need to be introduced to history. They need to be, again, I used to tell my students that that was an important part of citizenship, again, to know a bit about the past. And one of the quotes I used to use, I think it was actually taken from Cicero, but one of the presidents of the University of Colorado used to cite this all the time. And it's basically the notion that if you only know your own past, you remain forever a child. So the idea of knowing about the past becomes very important, not only instructing you as an individual, but of course making you a better citizen. I had individuals who were teachers or planning to become teachers who came to the class and was told later on that teaching classes in African American history in particular was a great advantage to them because they're going to be teaching primarily in black schools. And so while they might not be teaching history, they thought it was important to know a little bit about the history of the African American experience in this country. When I would go out into the communities and I would go to elementary schools or middle schools or high schools or universities and talk about the black past and talk about African Americans in the West, this was a way of addressing the public. And I also speak to civic associations and to various senior citizen groups, etc., and would again talk with them about and share with them about this history. They were not taking a formal class, and they weren't taking it for credit, but it was a way, again, of broadening, again, their historical understanding. So as things came up, as they watched things on television, for example, you're watching a television program and you see a black cowboy. Do you say, well, what is he doing there? Was that just put in for political correctness? Is there any historical accuracy behind this? By folks being introduced to, again, the historical information that's out there on black cowboys, you're broadening the public's understanding. And so I think that when I have spoken to, I can't say every elementary school or every middle school in the CSRA, but I've spoken to a lot of them. Over a period of 30 years, I've spoken to a lot of school groups and a lot of citizens groups. And so I think that in that way, it contributes to education in the CSRA in a broader sense. And that's what I've tried to do.
Most people who live in Augusta don't have any idea or appreciation of the rich wealth of history Augusta has. I mean, not in the context of just the black, but in the context of history of the South. Yeah, Augusta is it's a gold mine. And I never get the sense that, other than a few select interest groups like Explorers Augusta, are aware of the scope of the wonderful history Augusta has. Civil War history and everything. It needs to be done. I think it would help to raise the mindset of people who hear about Augusta, live in Augusta, who really don't appreciate this wonderful place from a historical perspective. And it seeps into every aspect of life. The architecture, the Georgian style colonial architecture. You'd be surprised how many people in Augusta don't realize that Augusta was at one time the capital of the Confederacy. Clue. It's amazing. So, I tell my students that you have no idea of the history of Augusta.
To find out more information in the history of education in the CSRA, visit www.augusta.edu/education/teaching-leading.